Welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, journeying together into deep discipleship. I'm Brian Fisher. This is episode 28, So Little Time, and it's a bonus episode because you've been asking a great question, and I just want to take some time to answer it. This season, we're digging deep into the 5 key elements of spiritual formation, the conditions that our hearts need to be formed more and more into the likeness of Jesus. And right now, we're exploring the first key element of time. Even though we're just starting season 3, some of you are asking some really good questions already, and there's one question that keeps coming up. So instead of just plowing ahead, I put this bonus episode together to answer your question, and then we'll move on. Here's the question. How do we find the time to build these immersive communities of spiritual formation that we keep talking about? In other words, you agree with the 3 primary problems, the great omission, and you also agree that spiritual formation is much more than occasional instruction. Based on all of our discussions about human anthropology and heart formation, you agree that we do need the 5 key elements to grow to become more like Jesus: time, habit, intimacy, community, and instruction. And even though we haven't gotten to 4 out of 5 of the key elements yet, you're a very intelligent group and you're already thinking ahead. You want to start working on how to cultivate these immersive communities in your own families or in your churches, in your communities. That's fantastic. Here at Soil and Roots, we call these communities greenhouses, and you can find a lot of information about them on the Soil and Roots website. So let's just take a few minutes and explore your question. When we have jobs, kids to raise, bills to pay, an American lifestyle that makes so many demands on us, how do we recreate immersive communities of formation or greenhouses? How do we find the time? And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're wondering if we have to build monasteries or convents to pull this off, and you're quietly wondering what you're going to have to give up to grow in your discipleship and to make other disciples. Well, in short, no, I don't think building monasteries or convents is what we're talking about. However, change of some sort, it's going to be necessary to recreate these New Testament-style immersive communities of formation. But look, don't stress over that quite yet, because I'm going to try to prove to you that you have already most likely built at least one, probably multiple immersive communities in your life already. You may just never have thought about it that way. All right, so let's get up to speed here. Soil and Roots is working on the great omission, the lack of discipleship in modern Christianity. And we're exploring the 3 primary problems that contribute to the great omission. The first, the forgotten kingdom. The modern church has lost its understanding of the kingdom of light. We've forgotten the comprehensive, awe-inspiring, life-transforming, world-renewing nature of the kingdom and its king. And so we often have an obscure, sometimes incomplete, reduced vision of Jesus. The second primary problem is the discipleship dilemma. Forgetting the kingdom results in this problem. The purpose of discipleship is to be formed more and more like Jesus, that our hearts desire what he desires, that we love like he loves, that we think like he thinks, like we do the things that he taught us to do. We need to know 2 people very well in order for that to happen: Jesus and ourselves. But sometimes we suffer from an unclear picture of the king, and in modern Christianity, there's actually little discussion or even intention of getting to know ourselves and our own story, thus the dilemma. And the third problem is the formation gap. That's what we're exploring this season. Becoming more like Jesus is the purpose of discipleship, not that we'll walk on water or become sinless this side of death, but we should expect to sin less, and more importantly, love more, live more freely, desire the things Jesus desires, experience the more of the Christian life that we often seem to miss. Every heart requires the 5 key elements in order to be formed: intensive time, specifically designed habits, intentional community, appropriate intimacy, and increasingly complex instruction. Now, back in episode 11, we looked carefully at some of the most formative human experiences that we have, like marriage, college, the military, and early childhood. And we discovered that all 5 key elements are absolutely essential and prominent in all of those cases. And then we explored how Jesus and the early church apostles modeled and cultivated all 5 elements. Many of us today don't have access to these types of immersive communities of formation. Most of us only have 1 or 2 of the key elements present in our lives. So we may be struggling to be formed as disciples. So part of what we're exploring here is how one person becomes more like another person from the inside out. It's primarily an anthropological question. What does it mean to be human? How does one human become more like another human? In this case, a human who's also God. Well, for our hearts to become more like the heart of Jesus, we need to genuinely know Him and we need to genuinely know ourselves. And the best way to know Him and know ourselves is to be a part of an intentional community that's focused specifically on those two things. But instead, most of us experience Christian things a few hours a week, and by and large, we self-direct our own discipleship, as we live, frankly, fairly disintegrated lives. Our journey in Christ is a sort of a la carte buffet bar. We pick and choose what we want. Self-directed discipleship, though, is usually a bad deal. God didn't make us to direct our own discipleship. Yes, the Holy Spirit guides us, but we're made to grow to become more like Jesus through all of our relationships, not only with God, but with others, ourselves, and all of creation. Early childhood is the most formative experience for human beings, and the reason's simple. Little babies have brand new hearts longing for relationships and formation. Just as their bodies go through incredibly rapid and very evident changes in the first few years of life, their hearts do the same thing. It sounds cliche, but it's true. How you and I navigate and view the world today is pretty much a result of what our hearts experienced in our first few highly formative years of life. We're talking about time right now, and the idea that you were primarily formed in your first few years of life is supported by the fact that 100% of your time was spent in an immersive culture of formation, your family of origin. Talk about intensive time. This is why the modern day approach to welcoming new followers of Jesus in a church can be sad. The person who has just decided to follow Jesus is a spiritual infant. Although the phrase has been vastly overused and sometimes abused, in his conversation with Nicodemus, Jesus refers to the experience as being born again. We are, in effect, born into a new family, as a new person with a new identity into a new kingdom, an entirely new reality. And at that point, we are spiritual babies. Now, in a healthy situation, when a baby is physically born, they're ushered into an immersive community that immediately welcomes them, soothes them, embraces them, cares for them, begins the process of forming their hearts holistically through time, habit, community, intimacy, and instruction. Their formation is right-brained and left-brained. There's physical touch, emotional attachment, careful introduction to new relationships, and a very constant and intentional presence. Someone is almost always physically present with the baby. Parents intuitively know that their child will be dramatically impacted and formed through presence, through simply being there, providing a secure, consistent, reliable bond with the child. In modern Christianity, however, how do we welcome brand new spiritual infants into our families? Well, we typically give them a hug and hand them a book. And we say something like, "Welcome to the family of God." And then we send them on their way, hoping they come back to church. Maybe we invite them to a 6-week class for new believers that introduces them to various doctrines. That's all fine, but let's concede it's a left-brain approach to a spiritual infant. Why do we treat spiritual infants so differently from physical infants? Why do we assume that a baby's character formation must be time-intensive, holistic, relational, community-driven, and immersive, but assume a baby Christian's character formation simply requires some literature and an invitation to return to a weekly event that has virtually no personal interaction? There are various reasons, but let's just take a quick look at two. First, we've traced the drastic changes in Western thought over the past few hundred years in previous episodes, from the Middle Ages down through the Enlightenment, then into modernity and post-modernity. One of the results of these changes is that the modern church unconsciously assumes that spiritual formation is largely, if not solely, a matter of instruction. If we just read enough of the Bible, listen to enough sermons, and do enough Bible studies, that constitutes spiritual formation. This is why so many churches have concluded that giving a new follower a book makes total sense. The new convert just needs to know what to believe. It's a left-brained approach to formation. But that response is woefully inadequate, and it's based more on Enlightenment assumptions than on the biblical model of genuine discipleship and anthropology. And two, the modern evangelical movement is far more concerned with making converts than making disciples. We've come to believe that our purpose is just to close the deal, to help someone say a prayer or make a decision. As long as someone says they want to follow Jesus, that must mean they are now following Jesus. Well, to put it bluntly, that's like parents giving birth to a baby in the hospital and then leaving the baby to fend for herself. The baby has life, we've done our job. Instead of ushering the baby into a loving, safe, secure family of character formation, we hand her a book and send her on her way. Then we sit back and wonder why the divorce rates, the abortion rates, the porn addiction rates are so high in Christian communities, why sin abounds, why so many Christian leaders experience moral failure. I don't think this is rocket science. What happens to a baby who's left to fend for herself emotionally and spiritually? What happens if she isn't ushered into a secure, safe, loving, relational, holistic culture of formation? She'll be malformed. She may physically grow up, but she won't grow up emotionally or spiritually. In many ways, she'll remain an infant. Genuine disciple making requires intensive time, specifically designed habits, a formational community, sometimes uncomfortable vulnerability, and an increasingly complex set of instructions. In other words, it's truckloads of work. It's messy. It's hard. Hosting an evangelistic stadium event or preaching an evangelistic sermon, it's fun. It allows us to report some exciting numbers of decisions. It makes us feel good that we've led someone to Christ. But the Great Commission does not call us to make converts. We're called to make disciples. Jesus' invitation is to follow him, not just to decide to follow him. I was on a video conference recently with Os Guinness, who is a respected author, sociologist, and cultural critic. Several times he noted that the Western church is weak, primarily in terms of its ability or willingness to influence culture for the kingdom of light. Well, of course it's weak. If modern Christianity is filled with converts, whether they're real or not, who don't know what a disciple is and have little opportunity to become one, that would imply that the Western church is filled with babies. All right, let's finish off your question. Fish, if the path to restoring biblical discipleship is to form immersive cultures of spiritual formation, how exactly do we do that? How do we recapture time, habit, community, intimacy, and instruction? Can that even be done in a modern-day institution of the church? The answer is yes. I'm researching various groups and movements that are working on this. Soil and Roots isn't the only effort working to recapture genuine discipleship, spiritual formation. Now, we've developed the greenhouse model. You can find all sorts of information on that on the site, and we're going to be exploring it in great detail by the end of the season. A greenhouse is a small group of intentional disciples who meet consistently, regularly, to explore and practice the deeper end of Christianity. Just be aware that part of what I'm asking you to consider is that programs, systems, and institutions may be a part of solving the discipleship dilemma, but they're also part of the problem. We need to be really, really careful with those things. Soil and Roots greenhouses, they're pretty organic. We practice 4 rhythms and have a little bit of structure, but we try to keep that structure to a minimum. Remember, the larger the institution, the smaller the individual. And programs and systems are great. I love them, but programs and systems generally downplay the individual and the individual's story. Which brings us to time. In our fast-paced, performance-driven, instant everything Western lifestyle, how can we possibly make time for these immersive cultures, for tighter, more intentional communities? Greenhouses take time. Any intentional spiritual formation is going to take time. It's a fair question, though some of you have actually already answered it in your communication with me, and you're right. The answer to creating the time and space for genuine discipleship means we need to reorder some of our lives. We reprioritize. We seek first the kingdom and its king. And that also involves prioritizing the exploration and understanding of our own stories. We purposefully place the formation of our hearts as the number one thing. That getting to know Jesus, and thus getting to know ourselves, is what everything else is ordered around, and we invite those around us to do the same thing. Now you might be thinking, well, I have to work, and I have kids to raise. Well, of course we do. But do you see how we're already creating false segmentations? Why is your work or raising your kids disintegrated from the formation of your heart into the heart of Jesus? We are integrated beings living in an integrated world. I've heard various sermons and messages about bringing God into the workplace. It's an odd statement. We don't need to bring God anywhere, nor can we. He's already there. He's over all, through all, and in all. We're trained to think that discipleship is the time we spend only on Bible things, and that time spent on other things can't possibly be discipleship. Well, we're now drifting into this Enlightenment view of spiritual formation, that if we aren't reading our Bible or doing a devotional, we aren't being formed. But we're always being formed one way or the other, no matter what we're doing. Remember the last episode on neuroscience. Our formation isn't centered in the left brain, it's primarily centered in the right brain. Relationship, attachment, identity, community, vulnerability. True spiritual formation is a whole brain journey. So first, we need to unwind ourselves from the idea that the only way to form immersive cultures is to quit our jobs and build convents and monasteries. However, forming immersive cultures of formation, it does mean some reordering. What would my life look like if I reordered it so that spiritual formation was at the center? Remember, John Calvin said we cannot expect to know God fully if we are not willing to know ourselves, for one depends on the other. That might be a radical statement to some of us. Does this reordering of our lives to seek the kingdom first, to prioritize becoming like Jesus, mean things will change? Yeah. There's no character formation without change. But don't stress out quite yet. The tension that we feel when we begin to contemplate what a life ordered around discipleship means is normal. But let's just challenge each other. Have you ever been in love? When you were falling in love, did you reorder your life so that you could spend time with your girlfriend or boyfriend? Meaning, did you make cultivating your relationship with your lover your main thing? I suspect you did. Maybe you did work less to be with your lover. Things that were previously important, they took a back seat to the person you wanted to be with. When Jessica and I were falling in love, we had a stretch where our relationship was long distance. On one particular weekend, Jess drove through a blinding snowstorm just to be with me. I would drive several hours to be with her, even for a brief amount of time, and then drive several hours back home. Virtually anyone who's fallen in love has reprioritized, reordered their lives to make the relationship the priority. We've given up on other relationships. We've stopped doing certain hobbies or certain activities. We've changed the way we organize our time, our money, our energy. Well, how about our kids? If you have children, did your life change when they were born? Did you reprioritize and reorder your life so that your kids experienced a healthy culture of formation? Did you physically change aspects of your house? Did you change your work schedule, your entertainment activities, your time with other people or hobbies? I suspect you did. My point is that we've all done this before. If you've fallen in love or had children, you have already reordered your life around the relationships that are most important to you. You've already reordered your lives to build immersive cultures of formation. You built them for your lover, or you built them for your kids. Well, that leaves us with a really hard, gut-wrenching question underneath your question. When we think about forming these immersive communities of spiritual formation to become more like Jesus, why do we feel tension? Why do we immediately go to the things that we might have to give up? We willingly gave things up for our lover and our children. We created large amounts of time and space for our relationship with our spouse and kids. We gave up other relationships, other comforts, other activities to create environments where our loved ones could flourish. Why then do we feel tension when we begin to contemplate what immersive communities of spiritual formation might entail now? Soil and Roots greenhouses meet for 90 minutes twice per week. Does 3 hours a week sound like a lot of time to spend on spiritual formation? Does it cause us some tension? Why? Well, the answer is love, or sometimes our lack of it. When we're falling in love or having children, our love is so strong, so powerful, so consuming that we do reorder and reprioritize our lives because we love those people deeply. Whatever sacrifices we make pale in significance to the sheer joy of spending time with our lover or our kids. But let's be honest, we feel the tension of making life changes to become like Jesus because we may not love him as much as we would like to think. It's hard to say to myself, I've felt it, but we may also need to confront our reality. And when we throw into the mix that the idea of discipleship involves the careful exploring of our own hearts and stories and not just learning some new Bible verses, that can make the journey a bit scarier. The biblical reality is that God's love for us is passionate, pursuing, purposeful. It's been called reckless. He's romancing us, wooing us, courting us, as it were. He not only loves you, he likes you. He desires to be with you. He desires you to be with him in a myriad of ways he's provided for you to enjoy him. He wants you to be formed more and more into his son because it's good for you. It's good for everyone around you. It's good for creation and culture. So yes, if you agree that the path towards becoming like Jesus involves recreating these types of immersive communities of formation, what we call greenhouses, whether in your church or your home or with your friends, yeah, I would certainly expect some change. We can't reorder our lives around who we love without change. But my point is, in affirmation, you've most likely done this before. I've done this before. We all create immersive cultures around us, around someone we love. So the question isn't as much of a how question as it is a who question. Who are we in love with? Are we the type of person who will do with Jesus what we've already done for our lover and our children? Will we create immersive communities of formation, placing the kingdom in our spiritual formation as the center of our lives? Hey, thanks so much for your questions, and I hope this short bonus episode has been helpful. We're going to keep talking about time next episode, and then after that, we'll move on to the second key element of formation, habit. Thanks so much for listening. For more information, visit soilandroots.org, and feel free to email us at fish@soilandroots.org, and we'll see you next time.